Coming to you at 320 kilobits per second from an underground bunker deep, deep below the streets of Soma, smack dab in the heart of San Francisco. It's the rock and roll coup d'etat with Eddie Winters.
Oh yes, my name's Eddie Winters, and we have got a very, very special guest on the line. You may know him. He's had a staggering career performing with the likes of Mick Jagger, The Who, Jeff Beck, Jack Bruce, Peter Gabriel, Joe Satriani, Tears for Fears, Judas Priest, Roxy Music, and of course, Toto. I've got to be talking about the legendary drummer, Simon Phillips. Simon, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I just arrived in Pennsylvania for our show tonight.
That is great. You know, you're on tour. You're doing. You just released this brand new record. It's called Protocol number 4 back in October of 2017, and you're going to be here. In less than a week here at Yoshi's in Oakland, California, on February 8th. I want to know, how is the tour been going for you?
The tour has been going fantastic. I mean, we actually started at the end of October in Europe, October 24th. We played 42 shows over in Europe over 5 weeks. And then we flew into New York, and we played one show at the Iridium. And then I had to cancel the tour because of some unfortunate incidents, and we managed to rebook the tour. So we went back to the Iridium, and we did 2 more sold-out shows there, which was great. Wonderful. We just did Chicago, we just did Indy, we just did Detroit, and we've got our last East Coast show tonight at a place called Havana in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Wow. And then we fly back out west again.
You know, you got the new record out. How has the crowd's been reacting to the new material?
Oh, they love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, it's it's a new band too.
Right.
Ernest Tibbs is still playing bass, same as in the last band, but we have now Greg Howe on guitar and Otmar Ruiz on keyboards, and it's given the band a different flavor, as it would when you change musicians, especially in this type of music. It's very reactive, so it really has. It's kind of changed the direction, which was perfect for the music on the record. Every one we play to goes away happy.
The musicianship in this group and on the record is just unparalleled. And I wonder, what, comparing previous records that you've done in performances, does the new group bring something out of you and out of your playing that you've noticed?
I think anytime you change, or anytime you play with you change a musician in the band, it's always, if they're a good player and a strong character, it's always going to change a little bit how everybody approaches, how everybody plays, and the sound of the band.
Right.
But I think the most, the big change, of course, is it's different music. It's a different set of songs, and that always brings a slight change. And this particular album is, it is a little bit different compositionally, let's say. It's also the first album that I did where there were no co-writes on this album at all. So that's kind of a first for me, because I've always written, but there's always been maybe a couple of songs on an album where I co-wrote with the band, like with Protocol 2. It was more of a co-writing situation. Right. I wanted more of a jam. It started off as a jam band. That was the concept, but then I realized that we actually had a lot more. Well, I had a lot more material than I thought I had. So that was our starting point. But this is a little bit different from that point of view, and the musicians just seem to really work with this music.
I'd read that you had written a lot of this music on the road. Is that correct? How do you write from the road such complicated composition?
Well, I was on a flight from Vienna to Tokyo a few years ago, I think 2014, or it was before I made Protocol 3. And it was a lot of flying time. Right. And I just had an idea, so I got out my computer. I did have a keyboard, so that was helpful. And I actually wrote almost a complete song on that trip, and that was one of the songs on Protocol 3.
Wow.
Called Catalyst.
Right.
So when I was on tour with Hiromi year before, 2016, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this again, but I didn't want to carry a keyboard around with me. So I just opened up the computer, opened up Pro Tools, and just wrote it in step time, straight in, no keyboard, which was interesting because then you only have to rely on your ear as opposed to chord shapes on a keyboard, which you kind of repeat a lot and you kind of get used to using. So that was pretty cool, actually, doing it that way. I wrote on trains, airplanes, hotel rooms. The majority of the album was really probably put together that way.
Wow.
And then when I got back to LA and went to my studio and extracted the files and put them onto the main, the big computer.
Right.
And then I could make all my edits and start really finessing all the songs and then writing a few more. But yeah, it worked. It was really cool.
So technically, this interview might be taking away from writing time right now as we speak.
Yes. Well, yeah, except I'm kind of writing this was quite a big thing. And I don't think I've written anything since we recorded this record. So, and that's what happens. You kind of just, you go on a hiatus.
Right.
You just dry out and I don't know, I just need to have a bit more time before I get the urge to say something more, you know?
I've seen some performances from this most recent collection of shows that you've done, and some of this music, I mean, obviously it's the compositions are very specific and they're very calculated, and there's great time signature changes and different grooves. And, I wanted to know, do you leave room for a lot of improvisation, or is it, because it seems like that, you're doing drum solos that are kind of a part of the composition. How does that work with these songs and improvisation? How do they mix together?
There's a lot of room for improv. I mean, essentially, in terms of song form, apart from a couple, in terms of song form, the more, let's say, jazzy tunes are basically, there's a head, a composition, and then there's the same changes or maybe different changes for the soloist, and the soloist would be Greg on guitar or Otmar on keyboards. But it's a little bit more, there's more arrangement going on perhaps. But then there's a couple of songs which are constructed more as a pop song.
Right.
It's not pop, For example, Passage to India is very much a tune. It's not a, it's a very simple groove actually.
Right.
It's got four on the floor and the kick. But there's a solo in there. It's a mixture, but there's plenty of room for everybody to stretch out. Absolutely.
Right. And I've got to ask, this is for a lot of drummers listen to the program, and you've got the specs for the set that you're using night after night. Let me ask you, have your approach to assembling a drum set, has it evolved over the years? I mean, obviously, since you first picked up the sticks to now, you've probably done a lot of growing. But how has the drum set as a tool for you changed over the years, and maybe even more so, in the last few years?
Well, I've used a large drum kit really since the mid-'70s.
Right.
I think 1975, it was not unlike what I'm playing now in terms of having 2 bass drums and 6 or 7 tom-toms.
Right.
So that hasn't changed. My concept of tom-toms, I just loved the tone of tom-toms. And I really wanted to make... Now, back in those days, it was kind of fashionable for drummers to everybody's drum kit was getting larger and larger.
Right.
Then it kind of got small again in the 80s. So more of the heavy metal drummers stuck with a large kit. More of the jazz drummers went back down to a small kit. It has changed, but very subtly. It's still, if you look at it, if somebody that didn't know what a drum kit was looked at it, they think it was probably the same.
Right.
But there are very subtle changes in there, and they've changed, just evolved, I think, as different drums were made, different sizes were made. This let's say, this lineup of the kit, as it were, has been around now since 2012,
Right.
2013.
So
So
definitely some years.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I do tend to, mainly because I've got drum kits kind of strategically placed around the world. And it's quite a feat to get them all equipped the same way, same kind of models, you know. So it's good if I don't do a lot of changing, really, because otherwise I'll fly to Japan, and then that needs changing, and then I'll fly somewhere else, and that needs changing, and it's just a lot of work, and you know. So I do try to keep some consistency with the kit.
You know, this kind of goes into my next question. I mean, obviously you've seen a lot of changes throughout in trends in drumming and in the music industry. Did you ever try to experiment with, you know, some of the digital drums and some of that technology, try to incorporate that into what you do, or was that kind of something you weren't interested in?
No. It's really funny. In the late 70s, an instrument came out called the Syndromes.
Right.
And I thought they were just dreadful. I thought they were stupid, you know, because basically all they were doing was triggering a synthesizer,
right.
You know, a bunch of oscillators. And actually in a very simple way. Back in the early 70s, you could have a drum that would trigger a mini-moog. In a way, that was much better because the mini-moog had a lot more choice of different sounds. I actually, Dave Simmons, you might have heard of Simmons drums.
Right.
Dave Simmons brought me his prototype to a session that I was doing at 10cc Studio back in late 70s, maybe 79. And he took them out of the bag, he plugged them in, and we got some audio going through the console, through the speakers. And he said, right, there you go. And I started playing a little bit and going through sounds. I said, Dave, are you serious? Instead of doing that, I went into engineering,
right.
Because the equipment that we had that was just being developed right then, digital delays, digital reverb, to me, that was much more interesting than something that made a silly sound. So I never got into electronic drums. I did get into sampling, but again, from a different perspective. I never was into. To me, you know, basically, you've just got to get the right drums, the right drum sound to start with.
Right.
And you see what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and you know, I wanted to ask you too, because you brought up the engineering aspect of your life and your career, and how, you know, did drumming kind of did that influence? Is that the same part of the brain that you use for drumming that you use for, say, mic placement or getting a sound? I mean, how did you meld those two things?
Yeah, no, that's a different thing. I mean, having said that, a lot of great engineers were drummers, which is really funny. Elliot Shiner, he used to play drums. But no, I was into sound and tape machines when I was a kid. My mom had, I was operating a ferrograph quarter-inch machine when I was like 3 or 4 years old.
Jeez.
She taught me how to thread a quarter-inch tape up and not twist it, and don't press the red button or you'll, you know, erase anything that's being recorded.
Right.
And then she eventually got a really nice system. She got 2 Revox G36s, which are tube tape machines.
Right.
And I used to play with these all the time. And I loved the sound of records. To me, sound was such a big part of my playing. And that's why certain drummers I loved, mainly because of their sound. Isn't that weird? It was more sound than playing, funnily enough. I used to get a record, regardless of the music, if I just really dug the sound.
Wow. So
I absolutely loved it. So a big part of my life was spent listening to records, figuring out how do they make it sound like that, you know? And I would always try to make my drums sound exactly like they were on the record. And I think that's where it came from. And then, of course, I got into recording sessions very, very early on. I was in the studio recording when I was 13 years old with my dad.
Right. I mean,
and then I started doing sessions when I was 16.
So you kind of grew up in that
Yeah.
environment. So it's kind of
The environment, a piece of metal boom with a mic dangling on the end of it was something I was very, very familiar with. The smell of a studio, the screens, the light, the clock. It was just I was brought. I was basically dragged through all the London studios when I was a kid. So it was part of my life. It was like in tandem with drumming. But in those days, you weren't allowed to touch a board as a musician.
Right.
Early on, we weren't even allowed in the control room. Only the artist, the singer, and the lead instrument, which in my dad's case would be the trumpet.
Right.
The other musicians had to stand outside because the control rooms were very small in those days.
Right. So you could get everybody in there.
So it kind of took, doing all these sessions, I used to watch every engineer like a hawk. And I learned all the names of all the mics and tape machines and speakers and consoles. And one day in 1983, I was working with Mike Oldfield, and he asked me to co-produce him. And he fired the engineer. He said, "You're engineering now." And that was it. That was my start of my professional engineering career.
That must have been an intimidating kind of leap to go, well, you're the engineer now. Have you ever doubted yourself, or did you ever doubt yourself with your ability?
I kind of knew the basics of signal path,
right.
But he had a Neve 8108 at the time, 32 channel. I don't know if any of this stuff means anything. A NECAM automation system.
Right.
He had what's the name of the tape machine? We don't have tape machines anymore.
No.
ATR 124 Ampex. Oh yeah, I didn't know how to operate those things yet, but I knew the basics. He came in with the Neve manual, plopped it on my lap, and says, "I'll be back in 2 hours." So I had to read the manual and then just look at each part of the console. But I had a working understanding of what happens. This is in, this is out, this is routing, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And he came back in 2 hours, and I didn't get very far with this manual. And he said, "Right, we're going to record acoustic guitar." And out he went. He had his mic set up. He sat down and started strumming. And I'm just looking for a meter that's moving.
Right.
That's all I'm looking for. And I find a compressor, an 1176, and I see the meters moving. I see the number on it. I look at the patch bay. I find it. I see, and process of elimination, arm a few tracks, and one of them's going to move.
Right.
So that was it. He was fantastic, Mike. He just knew because we'd been working together, and he knew I was so into it. And he always loves working with musicians as engineers. And he's tired of doing it himself at that point. So he was really encouraging. He taught me everything pretty much I know about engineering, apart from all the stuff I picked up from all the wonderful engineers I've had the fortune to work with afterwards,
Right.
But he was the guy. He recognized it, and he said, "Off you go."
Wow.
That's
incredible.
It was pretty cool.
Obviously, with your drumming and obviously with your engineering work, you've worked with countless, huge musicians, artists. Was there ever someone that you had met that you were maybe starstruck by or intimidated by working with? Was there ever a point where you were like, wow, you know what? I cannot believe that this is happening.
Absolutely. Going back to sessions in the 70s, I was a huge fan of a band called Colosseum.
Right.
John Heinzman. And the keyboard player was a guy called Dave Greenslade. And then one day I got a call from Dave Greenslade. "Would you play on my record?" And this would happen all the time. When I first met Pete Townsend, I'm like going, wow. But, you just kind of put that professional face on.
Right.
And here's the funny part of that. You'll get a call from somebody who you've never really liked their music or their records.
Right.
And suddenly you've been asked to play on their record. And you go, "Oh, boy,
right.
This is going to be interesting." And what's amazing is you turn up, and they're absolutely lovely. You realize their music is absolutely fantastic. And then you suddenly kind of get it,
Right.
And you have the most wonderful time. And alternatively, you can get a call from somebody who you're a big fan of, and you turn up, and they're not very friendly. it's weird, and even working with them is kind of laborious. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
You learn. It just shows you. If you're listening to music and collecting records and collecting music, it's just so different from when you're in a scenario when you're working with all these different artists. And I would say 99% of everybody I work with, I've learned something and had even if it's been a tough recording session, you always learn. And so I'm absolutely, so grateful to be living in a time where we were making so many records.
Right.
Yeah.
Simon, you've got so many amazing stories. I could have you on every week. we could do a segment. Have you ever thought about doing a book, doing an autobiography or something?
I've been writing it for the last few years.
Is that right?
The last few years I haven't done very much to it, but when I was on the road with Toto, the last few years we were on the road, I did a lot of writing.
Wow.
And just recollecting scenarios from going way back to different tours in 1974, 77, 83, and just trying to remember, mainly remembering the people. That's the tricky thing. All the people that were on those tours, and I would say, one of the sad things about this, my recent loss with the Thomas fire. I had, boxes of photographs.
Oh no.
And letters from people, beautiful notes from amazing artists,
right.
And they've all gone.
I'm so sorry to hear.
That's, that it's not only sad, that's also going to be very difficult to write about because you can't remember everything. And so that's going to take a lot of just sitting down and trying to recollect. And I think the best way is you just have to. It's like writing music. You write and leave the gaps, but don't stop from writing. I think that's always I know it's when people first start writing music, they want it to be perfect first time out. Music isn't perfect. It's not supposed to be. So just get it out. Get it out as much as you can. If you can't think of the next bit, leave a gap. Go to the next one, It'll come back. You'll fill it in. And I think I'm going to use that kind of concept with writing the book. I'll just leave gaps and hopefully, reading it back, maybe it'll come to life.
Well, Simon, I want to thank you so much for being on the program. For everybody listening, of course, in the Oakland area, please come out to Yoshi's on February 8th, next Thursday, if it is not already sold out, because I hear tickets are going quick. And also, you can pick up your new record, Protocol 4, it's on simon-phillips.com. That's your website. Simon, thank you once again for being on the program and sharing so much of this great insights.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eddie. Thank you.
You've got it. Well, take care and enjoy the rest of your tour, sir.
All right. Lovely.
All right. We'll see you soon. There he is. Simon Phillips, the one, the only.